arresting hundreds for taking part in anti-war protests. CNN's Nick Robertson joins us now live from Moscow. And Nick, a government warning not to protest did not stop every Russian from taking to the streets. An independent monitoring group says that more than 1,700 people have been detained across Russia today for protesting. You saw several demonstrators arrested right in front of you earlier. Tell us what's happening in Russia and Moscow right now.
Yeah, that was a pretty big demonstration by Moscow standards of recent times, given that there wasn't any time for people to prepare for this, Jake. Remember, citizens here just woke up like everyone else to the news of the war this morning. And normal times, people would have a little more organizational time. Obviously, they have to organize these things sort of covertly on chat groups and things like that. So the figure of 900, more than actually 900 people arrested in Moscow is a relatively big number. And the police were pretty brutal about it. I saw one man being pulled by his face, people slapped up into the side of the police trucks, their legs spread out, rough-handled into the police vehicles in some cases. And these were protesters who were doing nothing more at times than just holding up a placard saying no to the war. Police were sort of searching their bags before they were being bundled into the police vehicles. But the warnings from the government, very clear, very stark. If you protest, you could get a criminal record and that could haunt you for the rest of your life. I talked to some of the people who didn't get arrested. And I have to say, it was humbling and shocking to hear these young and older Russians tell me just how much they're afraid, why they're afraid. They're afraid because they no longer trust their leader. They didn't really trust him before, but now they really don't. They're worried about where the country is going. One young lady said to me close to tears, she says, I love Russia. I love Russia, but she says, now I just want to leave the country. It doesn't feel right to me, she said, but with this leadership, what else can I do? So this was really quite shocking to find this level of frustration, of disappointment, of not knowing what to do about the actions their government's taking. I'm not quite sure how this bodes for the coming days and nights, but it's very clear that Putin's cracking down heavily. That's his tactic. That's the way he does it, because he wants to snuff out these demonstrations. The war won't be done in a day in Ukraine, and these protesters are likely to try to come back out again. So he's going in heavy, it seems, early on, Jake, to send an unequivocal message. Keep off the streets.
Nick Robertson in Moscow, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Let's discuss all this with CNN Global Affairs analyst Susan Glasser, Center for Strategic and International Studies Vice President Seth Jones, and CNN counterterrorism analyst Phil Mudd. Susan, let me start with you. For months, Putin has repeatedly claimed that he had no intentions of going to war with Ukraine. He reiterated this last week during a meeting with the German chancellor. Were the diplomatic talks with the West real ever, or was it just part of a strategy to buy time?
Jake, I think that the U.S. Secretary of State Tony Blinken said the other day that, they never really were for real, and that it was Putin's intention all along to invade Ukraine. He said that tragically just a day before the invasion, standing alongside the Ukrainian foreign minister here in Washington. And, it's my view that there never was a real diplomatic process, largely because Putin's demands were of the kind that it's impossible to negotiate with. He set forth essentially a demand that the NATO and the West turn back time, and turning back time is not possible. Changing the constitution of Ukraine to disavow NATO membership, things like that. So I don't think Putin was ever serious about diplomacy here, and he certainly has a long record of lying to other world leaders that should make them very wary of being credulous when it comes to any commitments he gives to them.
Seth, a Kremlin spokesperson gave this bizarre and rather offensive explanation for the invasion, saying that the Russian forces are in part engaging in denazification of Ukraine, removing Nazis from Ukraine, even though there's zero proof of any Nazi-like efforts. And we should mention the democratically elected president of Ukraine, Zelensky, is Jewish. How do you explain this? What do you make of this?
Well, look, I think this is part of the Kremlin's rationale, disinformation campaign to go in. But I'll tell you, Jake, what has me worried about that kind of language, and I'm already hearing from sources inside of Ukraine along these lines that the Russians are making lists of individuals. I actually worry that they'll start to conduct killings against individuals in Ukraine, government officials, members of the security services, and the military, particularly ones that have vowed to fight against Russia. And I worry about war crimes now coming up with those kinds of words.
And Phil, U.S. intelligence appears to have been pretty accurate when it comes to Putin's thinking in the lead up to the invasion, not to mention it was yesterday that we were saying that the U.S. intelligence they were warning Ukraine it was going to be a full-scale invasion, not just a partial one. None of this clearly stopped Putin. What more do you think the U.S. intelligence community is doing right now?
Boy, we're missing half the question. We focused on the question of what the Russians will do. I remember back in the day, I used to support the CIA program to oppose the Russian invasion into Afghanistan. So let me take you into that piece of the puzzle. Question one, from the intelligence perspective, how are the Ukrainians doing against the Russians? What are their strengths and weaknesses? Are there opportunities there that we're learning about in terms of the Russian offensive to support the Ukrainians? There's intelligence coming in, I guarantee you, on how the Ukrainians are performing. Second and final question, looking at the perimeter, in particular Poland. If we want to support the Ukrainians, if we want to use the Europeans, including Poland, how willing are they to support us? How willing are they to back, for example, shipping of weapons through Europe? And what are the attitudes of political elites in Europe about providing military support to Ukraine? So we focused on one piece, Jake. What are the Russians doing? Now some of the attention's got to shift to the other piece. Can we help the Ukrainians? What are their strengths and weaknesses? And who's going to be with us if we want to do that, Jake?
Susan, we're seeing the Russian government arresting anti-war protesters in Moscow and throughout the country. We saw something similar during the 2014 invasion of Crimea. Does Putin care about this internal dissent?
Absolutely. He is, like many dictators, an insecure dictator, and it's almost certain that this external aggression will go hand in hand with a further round of internal crackdown and, the evisceration of civil society and democratic small d opposition has been fundamental to, Putin's rule over these last 2 decades. In fact, over the last year, you've seen a very significant crackdown by Putin, the arrest of Alexei Navalny, the most significant potential political opponent to him. Navalny is actually on trial again this very week on trumped-up charges from his prison cell. You saw the shutting down of Memorial, the leading human rights group. The fact that so many people did come out despite this risk to themselves in the police state is I think, notable, but that will be cause for further crackdown and paranoia on the part of the government. There's always been a connection between the internal cracking down of dissent in Russia and Putin's use of external aggression. And I think we're going to see that again this time.
Phil, multiple Russian government websites appear to go offline outside Russia today. Cybersecurity experts tell CNN that the outages could be part of the Kremlin's own moves to preempt any potential cyber attacks by, I suppose, the United States or others. President Biden says the U.S. is prepared to respond to any Russian cyber attacks against us. What's going on here, do you think?
I don't think you can be prepared for that. Let's look at 2 dimensions of that. The first is what we saw in the election campaign in the United States last time around. If the Russians want to get involved in social media in the United States and try to influence people by explaining how this was a legitimate intervention, they can do that. The second piece I would be looking at is if the Russians want to start intervening by sort of interfering with government websites, with government activity, for example, by getting into websites that are owned by Western governments, I suppose they can do that. I think they have one fundamental problem. And that is, if you want to influence foreign perceptions of the intervention, you have to start with a basis where the foreign perceptions are able to be influenced. And I think most people already have realized this is a Russian invasion. There's not much the Russians can do to persuade the West in Europe, the United States, that it's not.
All right, Susan Glasser, Seth Jones, Phil Mudd, thanks to all of you. Appreciate it. We're tracking the breaking news. Russian forces seizing control of Chernobyl, the site of the world's worst nuclear power disaster. Coming up next, we're going to talk to a congresswoman who operated nuclear reactors in the U.S. Navy about why that may be concerning. Stay with us.
When traders tell us how to make Thinkorswim even better, we listen. Because platforms this innovative aren't just made for traders, they're made by them. Thinkorswim by TD Ameritrade.
I'm Stephen, I'm 52, and I'm a makeup artist. I met my husband in 2002. I miss those eyes.
Do you think you could fall in love again?
I'm so ready, you know?
So, what do you see when you look at yourself?
I see a really long life lived of vast experiences.
Botox Cosmetic is FDA approved to temporarily make frown lines,